The first shockwave of the Arsenal transfer window has emerged with Arsenal's young starlet Chido Obi-Martin not very, but seemingly closer to an exit than ever before, leading to quite the meltdown on socials. We're going to talk about all of that and more, including some incomings, on today's Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show, joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. It's incredibly appreciated. I hope you've had a fantastic start to your week and I hope you're doing very well indeed. Good morning to those joining us live in the chat box. Thank you so much as always for doing so. Franklin, Blackshine, Steve, Damien, we've got Glenn, Olawale, Ismail, Martin, Shari, Barry, good morning to you, to Maximius and Harrison, Stephen, James, Carl, we've got Rowan and Bernie and Jack, Angela, Stevie, Knowledge, Dave, thank you to you all for tuning in. And I hope you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and rest of your week, of course, as well. Tomorrow, you're probably going to get the next episode, I think, depending upon any massive news drops today. But you'll probably be getting the next episode of the Dream Window, courtesy of our Arsenal content creators, which will be midfielders, of course. So make sure that you're alive and aware for that. So you're ready to drop your likes on the video. And speaking of which, please make sure you drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. Without further ado, let's jump into today's stories. We start with a little holiday update. Angela saying, how's the holiday so far? Yesterday, we went into the town of Siena. And as you can see from the image on your screen, we managed to visit the Siena Stadium for their now fifth tier Italian side. I was doing loads of research into the club yesterday and wondering, when I go to places, I tend to like to go out and I like to buy the shirt, the kit at the place that I've gone to. Did that with Copenhagen, of course, done that with Fiorentina when I went to Florence, and did that with Sporting Lisbon when I went to Lisbon too. And, it's just a thing. And now, sadly, the Siena's side, who used to be in Serie A as recently as 2012, I think it was, from doing that research, they've gone through 3 different rounds of kind of bankruptcy and exclusion from the league, where to the point now that they're sitting in the 5th tier of Italian football, playing in the Tuscan League. And the stadium, as you can see from some of the images, it looks great from the stadium. And then you start to kind of take in some of the outer aspects of that photo, like look in the foreground of the image, you can see the overgrown stadia, the overgrown seating, and it kind of tells you what state the ground and the club is in at the moment. It's a club that are in desperate need for, I think, investment. There's a lot of debt, and it's a shame because, as I say, they were a top flight side as recently as 10, 12 years ago. So it's the reality of football. Kind of make you realise how lucky we are to have a club that aren't in any kind of financial difficulty and that are very competitive as well. So it was an enlightening visit, and of course there was no club shop, which means that the fallback with the European Championships on us, I managed to get the current Italian national side shirt instead, because of course I thought that was the next best thing to do. But moving into more Arsenal specific things, and the reason why you of course have tuned into today's video, we start with Frenkie de Jong. Frenkie de Jong, of course, Barcelona central midfielder and Dutch international, has pulled out of the European Championships this summer as he has suffered more injury issues, which kind of raises the point around Arsenal's dream midfield signing, with de Jong often coming up in discussions and often coming up as a suggestion from Arsenal fans as who they'd like to see. And again, does this perhaps raise the reality of de Jong as a potential player for Arsenal with these issues that are going on with the players' fitness? And would that be the right type of investment for Arsenal in the summer? Well, we've talked about how injuries don't necessarily seem to be featuring too much from my perspective. And I think that, you can't account for them too much, because you can have a player that's got a great track record and yet still suffer from injuries, and a player that has had historical injuries and then not get injured at all. I think that you've got Thomas Partey as one end of the spectrum, then you've got Martin Odegaard at the other end of the spectrum, players with different relationships with injuries prior to their arrival at Arsenal, and then subsequently have then managed to either overcome those issues in the case of Odegaard or suffered further and repetitive problems in the case of Partey. So an interesting bit of Euro 2024 news there that does semi-relate to Arsenal and their desire, or rather some fans' desires to see him arrive at the club. Now, we talked a couple of days ago about kick it out, or not kick it out, rather. We talked about Bukayo Saka in particular being the face of England's defeat to Iceland and the systemic racial interpretations that were going on surrounding that story. And Kick It Out have actually come out to discuss this and write an open letter to the media. I'll give you the kind of the lowdown of it. It says, from the chief executive, Tony Burnett of Kick It Out, many fans will have awoken on Saturday morning and questioned whether anything has changed. Heading into Euro 2024, fans are rightly asking whether the current England squad will see a repeat of what happened to Saka, Marcus Rashford and Jadon Sancho after the last Euros final, where all three suffered terrible online abuse because of their actions on the field. It's a question we have been asking ourselves at Kick It Out. They continued by saying, it also sends a message to fans from Black and ethnic minority communities that they do not belong or can be abused too, Burnett wrote. Those points need to be considered when writing headlines or selecting images as deadlines approach. The words and pictures travel a long way, hitting harder than you might realise. And you can read the full statement, I think, on the Kick It Out website. And I think that it's a really important message to, of course, send. Now, Darren Lewis of the Mirror wrote a piece yesterday, which I also encourage you to go and read, of course, as a Black journalist, speaking about this situation, but also speaking from the perspective of someone in the sphere, in the space, and talking openly about these issues being raised, and talking about, people that he's met, people that he knows at publications, at rival publications that have written about the game, and then images of Saka have been used by, the editorial team, or in some cases, what I would point out, slightly kind of deviated from what Darren wrote in a sense, because some journalists do pick the images and do pick the headlines, from my own experiences, I speak on that behalf, but of course not all do. And so that has to be taken into account when you've seen people kind of using the byline of the article, and whoever has written this article therefore has got the brunt of the abuse when perhaps they didn't pick the picture or they didn't pick the headline, which does happen, but in some cases it does. And so that's why you need to be a little bit cautious of who and what you're saying, and who you're saying it to. But I think it's a really important thing that's obviously happened in the wake of that, and in the wake of that game, that it's being talked about and discussed by, without a doubt, the top people in that regard, which of course Darren is, and of course Kick It Out are a fantastic group which do plenty of work to try and raise more awareness in this field as well. Moving on to transfers potentially in the club, Arsenal have been linked, as we know, to Justin Bijlow. But according to the Telegraph, Arsenal have also got their links to Geerstruida, who is a defender for Feyenoord as well, can play at a right-back position, can play centre-half as well. Very interesting player, really pacey, physical and talented technically as well. And certainly a player that's been on the radar of a lot of Arsenal fans, I think, over the last few or even couple of seasons at least. And he is now also being linked as a potential depth defensive option for Arsenal as they move into the sphere of potentially signing a defender during this summer transfer window. There are suggestions that Bijlow is considered to be Arsenal's number one suggestion for their number two goalkeeping spot now, which makes, plenty of sense, but we're expecting movement from Arsenal, in these coming weeks, and it could be that the backup goalkeeper position is something that we see happen early on. But with both players, with the Dutch national side, there could be a suggestion that they may indeed wait until after the European Championships before any decisions are taken on their future. And not lastly, but penultimately, Fabrizio Romano mentioning yesterday once again that Youssouf Fofana, Monaco midfielder, French international, will 100% leave Monaco this summer, with clubs, of course, not yet in any advanced negotiations or talks with the French midfielder, but that, of course, this expectation that he will leave the club during the window remains. I'd love to see Arsenal to go in and bring Fofana in as a depth option to their midfield. It really raises our floor. But there are still no concrete suggestions that Arsenal will be going into the market and looking at Fofana right now. There's been kind of loose links and loose mentions of Arsenal and Fofana's name, but so far, nothing too concrete on Arsenal moving for the French midfielder, which is a shame because I'd love to see it happen. And the headline story of the day is one which did rock the Arsenal fan base. According to Academy Scoop on social media yesterday, a suggestive story said, exclusive, Bayern Munich are in advanced talks to sign Chido Obi-Martin, hoping to beat rivals Borussia Dortmund to the striker's signature. The Danish talent rejected Arsenal's most recent scholarship offer this week and looks set to walk out of the club this summer. Arsenal will continue negotiations to keep young Chido, but are unlikely to be willing to match Bayern Munich's financial offerings. Now, of course, this did spark quite the reaction from Arsenal supporters, and plenty of discussions took place about Arsenal's capacity in their youth academy to keep their top talents. A very well educated and well-informed site on youth football as well, which is The Secret Scout. I believe made a comment on this. I'm now looking for it and I can't seem to see it pop up. I don't know if it's disappeared. It does seem to have disappeared, which is a shame. I don't know why the reason for that would be, but I have been looking on the Secret Scouts page to see if they've got any, potential updates on Chido Obi-Martin, but it doesn't seem to be. I'm not working this week, so I'm not sending in any messages to catch up on things either. I'm also looking on some of the other youth kind of reporters. George Bird, who covers a lot of the youth football as well, has not said anything that I can see, unless it's done something just now in his replies, which I'm just checking again, which I'm not seeing anything either. But yeah, there's no real updates beyond that claim that we've seen from Scoop, who suggests Obi-Martin would be leaving the club. So if there are any further reports that either confirm or corroborate the story, we will, of course, bring you that and talk about it. But I'm personally, whilst I'm on holiday, not jumping around and sending in any messages or anything like that at this moment in time. So I won't get any updates from my perspective until I'm back from my holiday, but hopefully we'll get some reports in the next couple of days or so. I refuse to work on my holiday other than this. This is all I'm going to be doing for you guys. So I'm not going to be chasing stories. But in regards to if, let's say, hypothetically, this was to happen and this Scoop story is true, it would be a big blow, a really substantial blow to the Arsenal Academy. He is an exceptionally talented youngster playing at under-18s level at the moment, scoring record numbers of goals, of course, scored 8 in one game even, and is seen to be one of Arsenal's biggest talents. Now, the way in which this situation works is that when, you turn 17, you get offered a pro contract, but it's a very volatile arena, youth football. Players can get snapped up from clubs very easily despite being at clubs for a number of years because there aren't any long-term deals going on at that point. Arsenal, of course, have managed to look into Nwaneri and Miles Lewis-Skelly, two of the other high-rated youngsters on their books, and get them both to sign new pro academy contracts, which is obviously very important, and just professional contracts, which is very, very important indeed. In fact, Ethan Nwaneri is one of the most lucrative, if not perhaps the most lucrative pro contract Arsenal have ever offered to a player of that age group. So there is a real intense need and desire from Arsenal to try and get these top talents to sign. If Obi-Martin does leave, yes, it'll be a blow, but at the end of the day, this is a 16-year-old player that scored a lot of goals at youth level, which is obviously we find really exciting, but you can never justify getting too angry, I don't think. I mean, I think a really good example of a player that scored loads and loads and loads of goals at youth level, but has not necessarily been able to translate that into a senior level is a player like Youssoufa Moukoko. You may know him from Borussia Dortmund, of course, 19 years of age now. He's still exceptionally young. So it's unfair to kind of, look into him as anything, other than still a talent. But, he scored tons of goals at youth level, at both international youth level and club level. It's not been prolific since he's just stepped into, the senior scenes at Borussia Dortmund. But he's still been able to put up some decent numbers. I think he got 5 Bundesliga goals in 20 Bundesliga games this season, so 1 in 4, which is not bad for a player of 19 years of age. But, you think about the numbers that the likes of Bukayo Saka was producing at 19. You think about what Vinny Jr., of course, has done. There are levels to this. There are certainly levels to these kids and these youngsters coming through. But Arsenal would be losing a fantastic talent if they were to lose him. The encouragement from that article was, or the post on social media was, that Arsenal are going to continue to try and negotiate things. We did hear that he'd swapped agents to the same agency as Bukayo Saka and Folarin Balogun. So there's obviously some very real familiarity between that agency and Arsenal, and success in renewing players' contracts like Saka, like Balogun, as well, and Reece Nelson and Eddie Nketiah. So we know that there's a good relationship there with the agency. We know that that's not necessarily going to be a problem. But if Obi-Martin feels as though the pathway is not there for him at Arsenal, and that with Arsenal signing Kai Havertz and with suggestions that Arsenal want to go and sign another striker during this window, can you really blame a young guy for seeing opportunities where he might be given promises of, potentially more game time? And not only that, but their suggestions was from the article from the post, was that Bayern Munich would be offering a huge sum contextually for this age group that Arsenal, if it is indeed true, aren't necessarily willing to match, which you have to respect to a degree. You don't just pay whatever it takes to keep a player, whoever they are, because no player is ever bigger than the club. You can't be held to ransom. And I'm not saying that's what's happening, but just hypothetically, you can't be held to ransom just because another club has put a huge offer on the table, respectively, for that level. So let's see. I hope that this changes. I hope that he stays. I hope that we keep hold of him. I hope that, we see some further stories coming out to this regard very soon. But at that age, if you're given a huge financial incentive, I can imagine it's exceptionally difficult to turn that down, because there's no guarantees in football, even if you're producing some massive numbers. And if you're offered something kind of crazy, I think for your family, yourself, I have absolutely no qualms with anybody choosing that route at that age, because, you never know how long your career is going to be in this sport. So taking that opportunity, you just can't have too much judgment about it, I don't think, personally, is my view. But we'll get some more of your thoughts on this, of course, in part 2, which will follow right after I've told you about this. You can, of course, win a signed and framed Thierry Henry signed shirt. There are still tickets available for this competition, and I recommend that you don't waste any time and get involved, because those tickets are diminishing rapidly. There is now less than a third. In fact, I think there's exactly a third of the tickets. 399 went on sale, and there's 133 left. UK-only competition, of course. There's some instant win prizes, which you can find out all the details of down in today's link in the description. So best of luck to those that do get involved, and let us know if you are indeed successful. Let's go to part 2 and your questions, though, right after this. Okay, part 2, which is the element of the show where we jump into the chat box and get some of your thoughts on the stories that we discussed and on some other topics as well. So let's jump into the chat and do just that. But please do make sure, if you haven't done so already, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, with those notifications turned on, so you never miss a show. Right, let's go to Rich. And I expected this question to come up. Tom, does Arteta need to be doing more to make young players believe there's a path into the first team? I mean, at the moment, in Arsenal's senior side, you've got Saka, you've got Smith Rowe, you've got Nelson, you've got Nketiah, and Ethan Nwaneri got a second Premier League appearance this season after making a debut at 15 years of age. Charles Sago Jr. was given a debut in the League Cup as a starter against the Premier League side this season. And at the same time, Arsenal are challenging for a title, and Arsenal want to win the biggest and best trophies around. At the end of the day, what more can Arteta really do? Can he give some more minutes? Perhaps. Is that going to really change the thought process by playing, a Mario Kojadubri against Wolves, by playing Royal Waters against Lens? Are those two opportunities that Arsenal didn't give going to change the entire mindset of a player like Obi-Martin? I don't think so. I don't think you can have your cake and eat it too. If you want Arsenal to be competitive at the very top level, we are going to be in a position ultimately where we can't be giving loads of these opportunities to youngsters. We've got a depth problem. We know that. We want to sign more improvements. We want to raise the floor of our team. At the end of the day, I don't really know what much more Arsenal can be doing. Arsenal always get kind of jumped on as this club that aren't doing enough with their youth team. But at the end of the day, Liverpool have like one more graduate from their academy and their senior side, who are a team that are always lauded for what they do with their youth system. So for me, the disparity between the two teams is far smaller than what I think people would have you believe. Tizer says, hi, Tom. Fans cannot get season tickets unless someone passes away or hands it on, meaning some fans can have tickets for 40 years or more. How about season tickets which last 3 seasons and then go to the next person in line? It's a very difficult system to implement now, obviously, after the establishment of the current system. How would you then go about taking tickets away? Would you then suddenly turn to someone who's had a ticket for 40 years and say, you're going to lose your ticket in 3 years? I don't agree with that. I don't think that's fair on that person at all. So I see where you're coming from. We need to try and make it so that more people can have season tickets, but season tickets are very coveted, and people have been on the waiting list for a very, very, very long time when it comes to season tickets. So I don't see that changing, and I don't see that being something that would change in the near future. Morgan says, Tom, I would be disappointed if Chido left, but I remember he's being big for his age. West Ham forward who destroyed us at under 16s level. According to the Hammers mates of mine, he has dropped right off. Big for their age group matters. And it's really important to point this out. Players that do have a physical dominance for their age bracket in certain fields at youth level do dominate more easily. I'm not saying that's the case with Obi-Martin, but it could be. And that's why there's nothing guaranteed about a 16-year-old scoring or a 15-year-old scoring loads of goals. There's no guarantees with it whatsoever. But obviously you want to try and keep your best, your absolute best at the club. It's as simple as that. JK Gooner says, Nwaneri didn't get 1 minute this season, Tom. He's only had that one game in 22-23. JK Gooner, you might want to go back and watch the highlights of Arsenal 6, West Ham United 0. Thank you. Somebody says, is it simply a question of our youth players not being good enough? If they were, they would get minutes. I'm sure the club are addressing this after the recent outgoing players, or am I wrong? I guess I think that this is a really hard, harsh, blunt way of putting it, but it does have plenty of weight behind it. There is an argument that the quality in the Arsenal Academy has not delivered players that should be or would be or can get minutes at enough of a standard that we can afford to throw them into games. There's also something that Arsenal has said to be not good enough in their loaning of players. Like we should have sent Will Waters on loan, or we should have sent Mario Koja-Dubry on loan. And, I'm sure those players would have maybe liked to have gone on loan, but you also have to remember that you've got to keep enough quality within your youth ranks so that you've got a competitive youth squad, because the only way in which those youth players are going to learn the way in which Arsenal play ultimately is by playing in the youth team. As soon as you go on loan, you're not going away on loan to learn how to play in the Arsenal first team. You're going away how to learn to play at senior level. That's what you're learning mainly, and how to compete and what the level is, what the physical requirements are. But when you're playing in the youth team, that's the best education that you can get in terms of playing for the Arsenal senior side, because you're going to be playing the same systems. They try and make it so it trickles down to the youth system in terms of what style and philosophy we implement into that level. So there is so many benefits to still play with the Arsenal under 21s or the Arsenal under 18s. I'm sure some of those players would like to go on loan, but you've also got to have those loan offers. We don't know if those loan offers have existed. And also the club's got to look after the best interest of the player as well. And if you get sent on loan and barely play, think about Omar Rekic. They'll remember doing shows where people were saying, why isn't Omar Rekic getting any minutes? The guy who went to Sparta Rotterdam on loan didn't play a single game, or barely a single game. So I just don't think I just don't think that we're in a position really to be massively critical or scrutinizing of the way in which the academy is going, because there's also a lot of incentive at the moment on improving that quality. They are and have signed some really good young stars, Braden Clark being the first one. We talked yesterday about links to Callan Hamill at St Johnstone, another player that they're potentially looking at, 15-year-old. And of course, Arsenal have promoted through to their first team a number of young players. Not only that, but they signed players at a very young age like Saliba and Martinelli, and of course have now brought them through after spending a combined £32 million on those two players. And now we've seen them integrated into the Arsenal first team. How much are Saliba and Martinelli worth these days? So, and also we've made some good sales on youth players. Balogun went for more than £30 million despite barely playing minutes at the Arsenal first team, and of course hasn't necessarily been a £30 million player at Monaco this season. Joe Willock went for £25 million. Alex Iwobi went for close to our record sale. Emi Martinez, we got £20 million for. So we haven't exactly done terribly when it comes to selling these players on the market, but can we do better? Probably. Is there reasons why we have not? Again, probably. Dan says, Tom, do you think that if there's a chance that Chido Obi-Martin can become something significant, you overpay to realise that potential where such a small percentage make it? It would be a shame. Understandable, but would be a shame. There's no beating around the bush on this. It would be a shame if we lost Chido Obi-Martin, because it looks like there's a big talent there. It looks like there's lots of potential there. There's no guarantees there, but it looks like there's a great amount of potential there. So if it is true that we could be losing him, I'll be gutted. I'll be, very disappointed, but I'll make my peace with it, very quickly. Tizer says, Tom, what do you think of Arsenal women's new signings from Barca, Mariona Caldente? I may have missed you mention it. I didn't mention it, actually. So it's whilst I'm away, it's escaped me, if indeed. Let me have a look for you, shall I? Let's have a quick look and get some insights, shall we, on Mariona Caldente. I won't be necessarily doing kind of the breakdowns on the women's side of things this summer, just because of a time more than anything, and the resources it takes. But there are some fantastic channels. I mean, Tim Stillman produces fantastic work on that side of things. Has it been announced? I'm looking at these stories. I'm not necessarily seeing it being announced. Oh, here we go. So agreed to join the Arsenal women's side. That's why I've probably not seen it, because there's only been mild reports saying it's been agreed in the background. So as per Sky Sports, and Tim Stillman has tweeted this, Mariona Caldente has agreed to join Arsenal over the course of the upcoming season, which is seemingly good news. Of course, Arsenal are and have lost Viv Miedema, so getting in another forward is going to be very, very important. 28 years of age. Last season, 10 goals in 28 matches for Barcelona, 2 goals in 11 Champions League games. So I wouldn't describe that as prolific, but bringing goals back into the Arsenal women's team after we lost Viv is obviously something that they would like to do. So important signing, it seems. Jack says, do you agree with Arteta's pigeonholing of Smith Rowe as an 8, and which has then stunted his development? He was great off the left wing a couple of years ago, even a rotation option as Saka on the right-hand side. Now, it's interesting, Jack, because a lot of people actually thought that Smith Rowe's future lay in the middle of the park, and that actually taking him away, or rather putting him into those wide positions, was not going to get the best of Emile Smith Rowe. I wouldn't agree with the term pigeonholing. I don't think he's been pigeonholed into the left 8 position. Ultimately, Smith Rowe is, for me, best when playing more centrally. If he's a 10, you're going to get the best of Emile Smith Rowe. The thing is, we don't play with a 10. We play with an attacking 8. We play with a box-to-box left-sided centre midfielder, and we play with our holding 6, which also can do plenty of roaming as well. And sometimes those structures also change depending upon the personnel, be it Jorginho and Rice, be it Havertz and Ødegaard, depending on the personnel that's in there, sometimes that does change. But we don't play a 4-2-3-1 with a number 10, which would be Smith Rowe's best position. So the next best option for Smith Rowe would be that attacking 8 central role. I don't think it stunted Smith Rowe's ability to influence games. I just don't think that we necessarily play with the left wing style anymore that necessarily even suits Smith Rowe when he was playing on that left-hand side. He's been given chances. He's come off the bench in games. He started against Nottingham Forest this season. He started against Brentford in the League Cup as well. He's been given opportunities. He's not looked, like amazed. He's not looked like a player who I think, why aren't we playing this guy loads? Why is he not getting loads and loads of minutes? Why is he not playing more? And of course, he's had injuries as well, which have affected his development and his momentum. And we've had better opportunities to play others, in those positions. The rise of Rice in the left 8 role, Ødegaard's so invaluable that you can't change him. Trossard has become a starter on the left-hand side. And, we've been in a title race. So you can't just force Smith Rowe to get more minutes. You can try and give him as much game time as possible. But what we've seen from him is not going to guarantee a future. It's not going to convince the critics or the doubters in Smith Rowe that he indeed does have a future at Arsenal still. So I don't think he's being pigeonholed. I don't think his best position is in the wide positions. I think he is a number 10, but that's sadly a position that we just simply don't play. And he needs to go to somewhere, I think, where he will be able to play his best role and play more regularly as well, which could be Villa, it could be Newcastle, it could be somewhere else where he's going to be able to play in a position where they can get the best out of him. Rob says, how does it work with youth players, pre-contracts, compensation, housing, parents, all this sort of thing? Seems unfair for players to sign for other clubs when a club has invested in them for many, many years. Yes, there's obviously a lot of restrictions and legal sides around the ages of these players. Effectively, you can't loan a player until they've signed a pro contract, which they can't do until they're 17 years of age. When you do lose players at youth level, there is compensation that is paid. Amari Hutchinson, there's agreements that have come up between the clubs. We had a sell-on clause, to my knowledge, inserted into to Amari Hutchinson's move to Chelsea, even though it was a free transfer in inverted quotation marks. So if Chelsea sell Amari Hutchinson, Arsenal would get a fee, despite the fact, of course, there was no tangible transfer fee there. It's a case-by-case basis. They still do schooling, they still do training, there's a balance. If they have come from abroad, if they've come from very far away, they'll be, helped into housing, they'll be helped into, to what we used to describe back in the day as digs, and there will be certainly support given to those players in terms of accommodation and, where they're staying. They could have a host family. They could stay with a host family here in the UK, and sometimes clubs used host families for some of their youngsters, where they've got a good relationship with certain families that have looked after many of the young players that have come through. So there's loads of things that can go on at that level, but it is a case-by-case basis and can be very, very complicated as well. Let's go to Mark, who says, Tom, the Geerstruida interest comes as a Ousmane Diomande rumour seems to have quietened. He or Yoel Hato were the defenders I thought we might pursue. What have you heard? Well, the Hato interest, as I've heard, has always been very real, but the Ajax and Hato seem keen to continue their partnership as of now. Diomande has never been a defender that I've heard too much about in terms of links, just that there was obviously a monitoring of the player, a scouting of the player, but they're also scouting Gyökeres at the same time. So maybe there's been some crossover there. Geerstruida was a player that we were linked with when he was, at Feyenoord last season. He was linked in the summer. But nothing really materialized. Because we obviously went off for Yuri and Timber. And whether or not that changes this summer, again, this story's emerged again yesterday. I'm on holiday. I'm not chasing up any links at the moment. So I can't give you anything concrete on my side at the moment. Temi says, Tom, did you watch Curtis Shaw's sell, loan or keep review? He would only keep 12 players in our current first team squads. Interesting. I'll be curious how he's going to replace those. Damon says, you're only allowed 11 players in your first team, so sure, how he gets 12 in, says Damien. Baron says, David Ornstein just gave an update via The Athletic on Sesko. He said a midfielder and a new defender is unlikely unless we make sales, which aligns with what I have been saying with you. I'm not expecting Arsenal to spend huge sums of money unless we manage to get significant sales out the door. That is... that is the way that I've been told is to be expected. We're not expecting big money. We're not expecting big investments unless Arsenal get players out the door. Rich says, Tom, Geerstruida is pronounced Geertruida. Is it? Is it really? Any Dutch listeners want to help us out? Just corroborate Rich's story. Let us know. Let me know if indeed how you pronounce it in the best possible way. Derek says, we are linked to every player on the market. I wonder who we really are after. Also, fixtures out on Tuesday. Any predictions who we could be kicking off against? That's next Tuesday, right? I think. I might be wrong. In terms of the fixtures, predictions go out the window because it's completely at random, isn't it? So it's difficult to make any predictions. I just hope that we've got a good start to the season. Our run-in is relatively favourable, but you've got to play the big teams at some point. So maybe spread them out, and don't have like a horrible run of those games back to back, and spread them out across the course of a season so you can build up momentum going into those games. Tizer says, have you heard the reports about Fabrizio Romano saying that Juve are in talks for Douglas Luiz in a player plus cash deal? Should we make a move for him? No, because the player plus cash deal that is being talked about with Aston Villa includes Weston McKennie, who is simply not good enough to be in that Arsenal midfield. So no, there's no, there is no, what's the word? Favoritism? No. What's the preference of mine? There we go. There's no preference from my end to get Weston McKennie through the door, whereas Aston Villa seem to be open to that more. So no, not for me. Nizakit says, hi, Tom. Do you see us buying from rivals again? And if yes, who? They're always surprise links when it comes to rivals and potential deals to sign rival players. I'd be surprised if you saw a Chelsea or a Man United move this summer, but never say never. Matt G says, I'm confused about our Šeško links. A random Arsenal Twitter account said that we had already agreed personal terms and about to make a bid. I need to stop believing everything that I read. Yes, you do, Matt. As I mentioned a few days ago, I haven't had an update since then. The noise seemed to be a lot louder than what the reality of the Šeško situation was. So it's still not saying it won't happen. It's still not saying it might not happen, and we might not get a development next week. But as of last week, it was not seen to have been too advanced, let's say, at that point in time. Baron says, who's with me for a North London derby at the Emirates on match day 1? Get out of the way on the first day. That might be the way forwards for the North London derby. Oh, imagine. Has that ever happened before? North London derby on the first day of the season? Certainly not in my living memory that I can think of off the top of my head. I can't think of it. An North London derby on the last day of the season. Oh, these things would be quite the spectacle, wouldn't they? Ben says, who do you think will be Arsenal's top scorer at the Euros/Copa America? I hope Kai Havertz or Saka. They're the ones with the best chance of potentially being our top scorers at the tournament. So yeah, we'll go for. I'm going to go for Kai Havertz because I do have Germany in my sweepstakes, so I'm hoping they go quite far. And if not, of course, if it's not England, then I'm happy to hope that Germany get the job done and Havertz has a fantastic tournament. There's also that element of you kind of want your players to go out early so they can get more of a rest in the summer, and you can be somewhat selfish when it comes to talking about potential players in that regard. So maybe we want Germany to go out even quicker so Havertz can come home sooner. Anyway, that's going to bring us to an end of today's show. Thank you so much for listening, as always. I hope you've had a fantastic morning and start to your weeks and that the rest of it is indeed very strong. Tomorrow, you will most likely be getting episode 2 at 8 a.m. of our Dream Arsenal Summer, where we'll be focusing on midfielders. So make sure that you tune in for that and make sure you tell the chat box to make sure they drop a like on the video and help us to reach our 1K target every single day. If not, I'll be back on Thursday, of course, to remind you to try and help us out in that regard. So enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.